Hello and welcome back. Now that you have basic understanding of how to install a software on Linux, to some extent I'd expect that by now you can tell the differences between what a binary is, what a library is, script, what repositories are, and some of the terminologies that we talked about in the previous video. In this lesson, I'd like to take you on a journey and show you how everything fits together. And the way I like to do it is to actually take a software, install it, and in that process you get to see what a package is, what a repository is, and hopefully your first installation should go smoothly. Now let's get started. Assuming you were tasked to install a MongoDB on an Ubuntu server, and by the way, MongoDB is just another type of document which is classified as a document database. At this point, we don't really care what MongoDB does, we just want to install MongoDB. To get started, let's go to Google, our friend, and ask how to install MongoDB on Ubuntu. We are on 2004. Let's look for I normally enjoyed articles from DigitalOcean. Let's see if they have something written about installing MongoDB. Oh, sure enough, we do. Unfortunately, there isn't any from DigitalOcean for that version. Let's see. We do have someone here. Alright, here we go. Step 1 says, in order to get the latest version of MongoDB, you must add its repository to Ubuntu. And what that means is, for the package manager to be able to understand how to install the package, it needs to know where the repository is. In other words, you have to tell Ubuntu, hey Ubuntu, this is where my repository is. Go there and fetch my software. And that's what exactly this second line of code is doing here. We'll come back to this in a minute. Let's focus here first. So we have echo deb arm64 and then some https URL and a bunch of other things. What I like to do first is to copy this path /etc/apt/sources.list.d. Let's see what that is on Linux. We can see that it does exist, but there's nothing in it. This is where in Ubuntu configuration file where list of endpoints to download software is listed. And so our echo command is simply echoing all of this into that file. So let's copy this and go ahead and run this. Now let's list that. As you can see, we now have a file called mongodb-org 4.2.list. So it's just a file that has a list of where to download MongoDB. If I open this file, and sure enough, we have a URL that points to where MongoDB is. Out of curiosity, let's just see what's going on here. As you can see in the file, it's also helping us to understand how to navigate through the directory. So we have dists, and dist means distributions. And by the way, Ubuntu 20.04 has a code name called focal, and Some previous versions have Bionic, Precise, Trusty, Zenal. And when you see these names, there's just code name to represent a particular Ubuntu version. And in the case of 20.04, it is Focal. But having said that, this article is pointing us to download from Bionic. So we're going to go in there, and as you can see, mongodb-org 4.2 and multiverse, and within multiverse you can see the binary for MongoDB. And by the way, Ubuntu has 4 main official package repositories, which are main, restricted, universe, and multiverse. So in this particular case, we're downloading from multiverse. And to quickly talk about each of them. The main repository represents Ubuntu's supported free and open source software, meaning any software that is open source and supported by the Ubuntu community, you can find them in the main category. The restricted category represents the proprietary drivers. Proprietary meaning drivers that are owned by Ubuntu. And if you see any software in the universe category, these are free and open source softwares that are maintained by the community. So it's not maintained by Ubuntu, it's maintained by the community that are contributing to the software. And finally, the multiverse category represents softwares that have copyright restrictions or legal issues. And that's what MongoDB falls into in this case. And back to our documentation, this command right here is just a way to get the key that has been used to protect this repository software. So let's go back and run that command now. We have an OK there. And the next thing to do is to update the list of repositories. And you're going to take note of a command here, which is apt. We've been using this apt in past videos, but let's talk about it for a minute. Apt or apt is the command line utility that is used to manage the package, and it's called Advanced Package Tool. And remember, package management is what is used to manage the distribution of software, manage its dependencies and things like that. But to interact with the package management itself, we need some form of command line tool to do that. And in this case, we're going to do apt update to say, hey, update the repository information that we have. Now let's focus a bit about the output of this command. First of all, you're going to notice that we have MongoDB information coming back here. And that's obviously because we just added MongoDB to the sources.list.d directory. But how about these other ones? Where are they coming from? Well, if we check in the etc apt directory, you notice a file here called sources.list. Now let's open this file. You notice that just like we have in the MongoDB sources file that we just created, there's a default file that actually has a list of different other repositories that is default to the system. And the URL for this repository is obviously different from the MongoDB one, because this is where repositories that are specific to Ubuntu are kept. So what this means is, apart from the repository provided by Ubuntu, you can also create your own repository, add it to the list, and tell the system, hey, fetch the software from this location. And remember, we talked about the different categories of software, which is the main, the restricted, the universe, the multiverse. You can see all of them here. And if we take this URL and go to the browser, Sure enough, we have a location on the internet where you can find list of softwares to install. So there are some under the category for Bionic, Focal, Trusty, which are code names for different versions of Ubuntu. And like I said before, this specific version of Ubuntu 20.04 is Focal, and that's why you see Focal here. If you had installed 14.04 or 16.04, you'll see a different name. And these are the different categories I mentioned: main, multiverse, restricted, universe. Okay, so let's get out of this file and follow the documentation, which now says to install MongoDB. So let's do that. Now take note of what's going on. Here it says the following additional packages will be installed: MongoDB org Mongos, MongoDB server, MongoDB org shell. You can see there are a number of applications that are getting installed. We didn't have to specify any of these. The apt package manager is doing all this for us, helping us figure out what are the dependencies, and it will just out of the box figure out what it needs to do. And here it's saying 0 to upgrade, so if we were to upgrade this, apt would help us. 5 to newly install, 0 to remove, meaning apt could remove for us if we want to uninstall a package, and 112 not to upgrade. Here it's asking us yes or no. I'll say yes. You can see where it's picking up the softwares from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from that repository. Take note of a few things that's going on. It's deciding whether or not to create a home directory. It's adding a group, creating a user. It's just amazing. These are things you would have had to do manually yourself. The package manager is helping us to do everything, and as you can see, everything is done. Back to the documentation, we're talking about managing MongoDB. So there's a command here, systemctl. That's what we use to manage services. We'll talk about services in future videos, but for now let's just check the status of the program we just installed. Right now it's loaded, inactive, so what we'll just need to do is stop and start. Now let's check the status. Boom, active, running. So this is how to install a software on Ubuntu 20.04 Focal using our package manager. By the way, sometimes you get to see things like apt-get. You can use apt-get to do the same thing we've just done, and there are a few other commands with apt. You can check the manual. So there's apt-cache, apt-get. You can see there's apt-cache, apt-get, full upgrade, and you could just go through this documentation to read a few more. Well, I do hope this video has been very informative for you. If you really like what you've learned, please like the video, share the content, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. See you in the next video.